Whoever it was that said you never get a second chance at a good first impression clearly never watched a modern anime reboot of a classic manga. I mean, obviously, because it's a really old saying and they probably died ages before Hayao Miyazaki even invented anime, but where was I going with this? Oh, right. There's been a trend lately of modern anime totally revamping the classic manga stories they're based on. David Productions' take on JoJo's Bizarre Adventure has been making small and sometimes huge tweaks to fix inconsistencies in Hirohiko Araki's original story since episode 1, while shows like Parasite the Maxim and Devilman Crybaby have fundamentally reinvented their respective source material for the modern age. A new adaptation can provide an opportunity to rethink flawed plot elements, rework the pacing of certain story and character arcs, and reinvent aspects of a series that might not have aged well or that might take away from its core appeal. It's unsurprising to see MAPPA's 2019 adaptation of Osamu Tezuka's Dororo take this approach as well. The original story was an awkward attempt at dark fantasy with a strong dramatic premise shackled to the style and sensibilities of the father of manga's older, more kid-friendly fare, and it needed this kind of retooling to leave any kind of impact at all on desensitized modern audiences. But even taking that into consideration, it's remarkable just how thoroughly the series has been overhauled by director Kazuhiro Furuhashi and writer Yasuko Kobayashi, who also wrote the JoJo adaptation, in case you were wondering. It's not quite an adaptation in name only. It shares many concepts, character designs, and key plot points with Tezuka's original, but put them side by side, and the manga almost starts to look like a Mad Magazine parody of the anime. They're that different. Considering that Dororo is overshadowed even by many of Tezuka's own works, it's likely that many of you watching the new series haven't read the original books. So today, I'm gonna highlight some of the biggest changes made to this new adaptation and break down how they fundamentally alter the story of Dororo, in my opinion, for the better, with spoilers up to around episode 7. If you're not yet familiar with either version, I highly recommend watching Dororo on Amazon Prime before watching this video because it is one of the best shows this season, and I don't want to spoil it for you, but to give you a brief rundown, the series follows Hyakimaru, a samurai whose body is made entirely of prosthetics, on his quest to kill the 48 demons who stole his original body parts when he was born as part of a power bargain with his father, a feudal lord. He's accompanied on this quest by Dororo, a skilled and resourceful young thief with a mischievous streak a mile long. The anime changes nothing of this core premise from the manga, but it differs in practically every other aspect, right down to its art style. Tezuka's original manga is gorgeous in its own right, but it seems to waffle from page to page on whether or not it actually wants to be taken seriously by its audience. The artwork, though moody and atmospheric for its time, still looks very cartoony and flat, with big-eyed, exaggerated characters reminiscent of Disney cartoons and contemporary European comics like Asterix. Even its bloodiest action scenes have an air of slapstick about them, and anachronistic humor like horse-drawn carriages having license plates abounds. The anime adaptation holds on to the essential components of each character's design, but drastically tones down their exaggerated illustrative features and renders them with more delicate line work, bringing the look of the show more in line with modern anime productions, or at least anime from the 90s. Couple that with a muted color palette and more traditional watercolor backgrounds, and you get a show that feels rooted in the time when it's set, with a persistently dreary atmosphere and enough realism to make the monsters lurking in its feudal setting seem much more tangible and scary. This change in style reflects an intentional move away from the relative simplicity of the manga's storytelling, which can be felt from the story's inciting incident onward. In the manga, Hyakimaru's father Daigo is an egotistical and inhumanly cruel person from the get-go, knowingly selling his own newborn son to the demons in the Hall of Hell for power and killing the priest without a second thought as soon as he's seen, while only thinking of how this power will benefit him. In the new anime, more complex motivations and new underlying religious themes frame him as a more tragic, sympathetic figure. Before he kills the priest who oversees the Hall of Hell, for instance, he argues with him over the ethics of working with the demons, reasoning that the suffering caused by the famine and disease afflicting his lands is too great to simply ignore or pray away. He sees the world around him as a hell that's already been abandoned by the Buddha, and in that light, it only makes sense for him to reject Buddha's teachings in turn. return. The situation outside the temple is so dire that the priest himself echoes those doubts in his dying breath, thanking Daigo for killing him before he lost his faith entirely, while still fruitlessly begging him not to give in to evil and abandon his humanity. This change helps us better understand why Daigo would make the decisions he does. Simultaneously, it helps to highlight just how much the bargain with the demons really costs him. The next morning, he's a changed man, thinking only of his power, not of his people, just like his manga counterpart, and laughing as he rips his own child from its mother's arms and casts it away to die. It really seems as though he's lost his humanity, or sold his soul, if you will. This implies that his desperate ploy to save his people ironically turns him into the villain who will inflict untold suffering on them as the story goes on. But that's not the only ironic wrinkle that the anime adds to these events through some subtle changes. In the scene where Hyakimaru is born, the demon lightning that steals his body also breaks the head off a Buddha statue. The old woman who's sent to drown him in the river but ultimately puts him on a boat instead before being murdered by a badass zombie mantis samurai speaks in a way that implies that she's a devout Buddhist. And there's also a Jizo statue right next to the spot on the road where Dr. Jukai slips and stumbles on Hyakimaru's boat. The implication of all of this is pretty clear. Hyakimaru is only able to survive the unfortunate circumstances of his birth through divine intervention, which is pretty conclusive evidence that the Buddha had not, in fact, abandoned Daigo's lands, and that, in turn, he did not have to make the horrible sacrifice that set the whole story in motion. Despite his doubts, the priest was right. With Buddhist symbolism and artifacts continuously popping up throughout the series, this feels like an integral part of Dororo's story, yet it's all anime original. These thematic changes transform the series from a mostly straightforward adventure into a nuanced, theologically charged exploration of man's capacity for both good and evil. And this shift in focus has knock-on effects on many key characters. In the manga, Dr. Jukai is just a kindly, benevolent old man who takes Hyakimaru in and luckily has the prosthetic design skills he needs to help him move around, and who knows what cyborgs are for some reason. Like I said, it's a very anachronistic manga. His appearance in the anime couldn't be farther from that goofy, benevolent figure in the manga. He's a repentant war criminal who has devoted his entire life to charity in a desperate attempt to make up for his past misdeeds. Yet, somewhat ironically, that violent past that he's trying so hard to leave behind helps Hyakimaru just as much as his medical skills do, since that's what allows him to teach his surrogate son self-defense against the demons hunting him. Introducing this moral ambiguity to Jukai's character makes his story much more interesting in a vacuum and helps to connect it to the series' broader themes. And we see those themes extend to the supporting cast of other stories as well. For instance, in the manga, the people of Lady Bandai's village are all her unwitting victims, losing all of their wealth to her avarice as they foolishly honor her as their savior. In the anime, they become her willing co-conspirators, luring passers-by into her lair to be eaten and sharing in the spoils to enrich themselves. The demon may have coerced them into helping her at first, but it's their greed that drives them to keep it up. These ideas aren't all-encompassing, but they inform a lot of the adaptation's direction and play into what I'd argue are its strongest storylines. The anime original side story of the Jorogumo from episode 7 also explores these themes, albeit from a different angle. In that storyline, Yajiro's kindness and Buddha-like respect for all life convinces the spider demon Ohagi to change her ways and expunges the evil from her soul, which raises some doubts about the righteousness of Hyakimaru's demon murder road trip. Speaking of him, as he's the story's central character, these new themes naturally have the biggest impact on how Hyakimaru's portrayed. If you've only watched the anime, this might come as a bit of a shock, but in the manga, Hyakimaru can hear and talk from the very beginning. Okay, technically he can't. His ability to see souls is a full-blown sixth sense in the manga that also happens to allow him to read minds and project his thoughts into the heads of others, but functionally it means that he can create speech bubbles just like everybody else. And since he's able to talk, from the moment they meet, he and Dororo are able to develop a friendly, albeit somewhat sassy rapport with one another. In contrast, the anime's Hyakimaru has spent his his entire life under a Helen Keller-esque shroud of darkness, possessing no senses until he kills a few demons and recovers his skin and ears. He knows the man who raised him only as a vaguely reassuring blob of soul energy, and Dororo as a slightly smaller, more energetic and annoying blob. And the little thief doesn't have a much clearer perception of him. Even their first meeting is handled very differently across both versions. The manga frames their first encounter from Hyakimaru's perspective, having him stumble upon Dororo as an unknown child being walloped by a group of thugs, while the anime shifts away from his perspective after the prologue to show us how Dororo operates day to day before they meet and explain why those thugs were getting so violent to begin with. In this new context, when introduced from Dororo's perspective without the ability to speak, Hyakimaru comes off as a creepy puppet-like enigma, only slightly less threatening than the demons and ghouls that he fights. And the question of whether he'll emerge from his cave of sensory deprivation as a hero or a monster is one of the main sources of tension and intrigue within the show's overarching narrative. I'd argue it's the most compelling question in the whole story, and it was invented entirely by the anime. The anime's first two-parter, the story of the Moriko song, infuses these themes into one of the weakest parts of Tezuka's original manga, transforming it from a footnote in Hyakimaru's backstory into an essential turning point in his and Dororo's journey together. In the manga, Hyakimaru recounts this story to Dororo almost immediately after they meet. After meeting the blind monk on his way up a mountainside, Hyakimaru stumbled into an abandoned village full of war orphans and fell in love with a beautiful young girl named Mio, who provided for the kids by working as a servant, and it's very lightly implied a prostitute, at a nearby soldiers' camp. He was able to live happily with these kids for a while until one day a group of samurai showed up and slaughtered them while he was off training with his sword because they tried to stay in the abandoned village after they were told to leave. Yeah, that's really it. Upon returning to the scene of this massacre, Hyakimaru killed the samurai in a rage and felt his heart die with Mio, leaving him an empty husk, or at least that's what he tells Dororo. All of this takes place over the course of just 11 pages, which you can probably read faster than I just recapped them. The anime takes this skeleton of a story, moves it forward into Dororo and Hyakimaru's adventures together, and fleshes it out into something far more substantial and meaningful. In the new version, Hyakimaru develops feelings for Mio because after regaining his hearing, her singing is the only sound in the world that doesn't hurt his new ears. She, meanwhile, falls for him because he's gentle with her, unlike the brutish soldiers, and because he has the unique ability to see into her soul, which reassures her that it's not tainted despite her fears about selling her body to make ends meet. This is far from the deepest basis for romance, but it's a hell of a lot better than the manga's, "Hey, you're a girl who exists, I love you." In the anime, Mio's orphans become actual characters, not just props, and their deaths are a direct result of the actions they take in the story, not just a random bad thing that happens to them out of nowhere to make us sad. The kids have a long-term goal of starting their own rice farm, and in order to buy the rice seed they need to make that happen, Mio works double shifts at the camps of two opposing armies. That results in her being branded falsely as a spy and prompts the samurai to massacre her surrogate family for revenge. And likewise, instead of just having gone off to train with his sword at a very inopportune moment, Hyakimaru isn't there to protect them because he's busy fighting a demonic antlion that's occupied the land that they want to farm, something that he feels especially driven to do because it ate his newly regrown leg. Everything that happens to Mio and her family in the anime is a logical consequence of the steps they take to better their own lot in life, which makes it feel much more tragic and paints the anime's world as being even more unfair and cruel than that of the manga, where they were just killed out of nowhere for no reason. Beyond that heavy emotional impact, though, this reinterpretation of Mio's storyline also provides a lot of fodder for Hyakimaru's character development. We and Dororo see some of our first real glimpses of his humanity as he interacts with Mio and the orphans, but in the violent bestial rage he displays after they're killed, we see the very antithesis of that. Will Hyakimaru overcome this hardship and grow as a person, or will hunting down demons and being exposed to the evil in the world as a result cost him the very humanity that he's trying to reclaim? These two episodes provide ample evidence for both possible outcomes and put him at a very interesting crossroads that just doesn't exist in the original story. It's not often that I can say this when talking about an adaptation, but I think that every change the anime makes here is really for the better. MAPPA has managed to make each of the episodic stories they've told so far stronger on their own than they were in the manga, while simultaneously making all of them feel more interconnected and essential to the series' core plotline. It's clear that this anime is playing the long game and looking at the other changes they've made, like adding cutaways to establish Hyakkimaru's naive and pampered younger brother Tahomaru early on, and showing how each demon our heroes kill directly affects Daigo's land. I'm very excited to see how they plan to pay off everything they've been building up. Especially since the Dororo manga doesn't so much end as it just kinda stops, and the team at MAPPA has a lot of flexibility in how their anime can conclude. Dororo is quickly becoming the poster child for what adapted anime can really be, and what I want them to be. And I know that it's a special case, as a modern retelling released to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the original anime, which itself kickstarted the World Masterpiece Theater series. This is a rare project that affords its producers creative flexibility and the time and money they need to develop their ideas properly. Most manga and light novel adaptations don't really have a chance to reinterpret their source material quite so radically, but watching Dororo has left me wishing that more would, because it's taken a good story and transformed it into a truly great one, at least so far. What do you guys think, though? Are you surprised by how different this anime is from the original manga? And for those of you who have read it, what do you think of the changes they've made so far? Also, what do you guys think of this new, less linear, shorter approach to adapt or die? Post your answers to all those questions in the comments below, and while you're down there, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to catch more videos from me every week. This video doesn't have a sponsor, but on the subject of retelling great stories, the first Made in Abyss movie is coming to American theaters on March 20th and 25th in sub and dub, courtesy of Sentai Filmworks. The movie goes over the first half of the anime with some tweaks to the plot and new music from Kevin Penkin, which is always good. If you live in the US and you want to see it with a friend, you're in luck. Sentai has given me 5 pairs of tickets to give away to 5 lucky basement dwellers, and for a chance to win, all you have to do is follow me on Twitter at G0FFThew and retweet my pinned tweet about the movie. And if you don't want to take your chances, you can buy tickets to a theater near you by hitting the link in the doobly-doo. I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.